Just
Hey.
finishing walk with my dog.
Hey, isn't that fun? Aren't dogs the best?
Yeah, they are, man. They're awesome. We've had this one for about a year, and I had held off getting a dog for quite a while. And I mean, I love dogs and I grew up with them, but they're also a responsibility. So just to make sure you have enough time to walk them and they have enough room and all that stuff. So, but no, they're great.
Aren't they the best? You're just a little love bug. All you want is more love. What we could do all day is just pet and go for walks and cuddle. We're just the best friends ever. He wonders why I sit at the computer working all day. He just sits right next to me saying, "Is it petting time yet?" I feel like it could be. He's a good boy. All right, good.
So true.
So, a couple quick things. Let's see. We talked about quizzes on the website, how they can be useful. We mentioned adding a third day to the schedule. Everybody seemed either neutral or positive about that. So, I was wondering about Thursday, doing it Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. So, keeping Tuesday and Friday, but adding a Thursday to it.
That works for me.
That works for you? Good. All right. I've been going ahead and making more of the lecture notes and everything on the website. So I think I'll just try to stay about as ahead as I am from the start. And I don't know, it just got me thinking about it. And so, yeah, we'll probably be on a better schedule if we do it 3 days a week. And then the last thing I wanted to discuss with everybody today was the potential of switching around sections. So we're just getting into this section, and when we finish determinism and free will, the next section's great. It's interesting, but people might be more interested in other things. So the next question, skepticism and the problem of induction, and we have some great essays to read in that. It's not that long of a section either, so maybe we'll just do it and stick with the order. But the body, mind, and death section is maybe more up your alley as far as its relationship to AI and other things that I know you're interested in. Ethics is, of course, the only really good subject, according to Socrates, the only one worth spending any time on, so we could skip to that one. The existence of God section is way more interesting than you think it is if you think it's boring. I swear that's going to be probably my favorite section this time around anyway. So yeah, I guess the third thing I wanted to talk about was think about it if you guys find a section in the book that you'd rather do next instead of the induction one, and we'll circle back to the induction one. Just let me know, and if there's any interest in doing, or if there's a consensus about doing a different one, we'll probably switch it up. I think Path is not going to be able to make it today because he's got some internet modem issues. So why don't we do this? We talked about how you can use the quizzes on the website to aid in understanding, because they're sort of written to supplement class discussion things. Hey, Twilight, what's up?
Hey there, sorry. Left my mic on here. I'm changing a bandage.
Oh, no, you're good. You're good. Do the bandage. Surgery is first. All right, and then we were talking about adding a third day to the schedule, and unless it doesn't work for anybody here, I think I might keep Tuesday and Friday, but also add Thursday. It's going to help us to stay on schedule, I think. We might just be able to finish this section by the end of August, but we started a week and a half, 2 weeks early, and we're still just barely going to get it done by the end of August as is. So adding a third day would be useful, and let me know if Thursday works for you or if it doesn't work for you, because we might just do that, and that'll help us get through faster. I know that some people are interested in other courses that will be added to this one before this one's finished. So if we can get a good chunk of the way through this and get a good pace going, we might end up, replacing one of the 3 days with one of the other classes or something like that, or adding a fourth day and switching one of the days. So 2 on the intro course and 2 on ethics, or 2 on philosophy of mind or something like that. All right. That's pretty much it for the housekeeping, is just to talk about those three things. Keep it in mind, send me a message. And if you think about a section you want to do more than the induction section, which is a good section, and we'll just go right into it if nobody has any feelings on the topic. But okay. But if you want to do the ethics or God or a priori or any of those other sections, just let me know. All right, let's get into it. I think we're definitely going to wrap up William James, sad to say this time. We will definitely get it wrapped up, though. And so let's just discuss real quickly what we read in the rest of the, I think it's 2 more sections to finish up his excerpts here. So recap. Indeterminism just means that there is an element of chance in the world, and this means nothing more than that not everything is determined, right? So he may as well have just stuck to the word indeterminism. But in any case, that's all he's trying to claim, is that there's a possibility that something could happen in the world that we wouldn't have ownership of and we wouldn't have a claim to from the past. That the universe, as he says, waits until it's that time, and then the choice that's made actually brings something new into the world. All right. So it's just a negation of determinism and nothing more. But we haven't proven that this is, in fact, the way that the world is. All right. So he never made an argument that that's the way the world is. He just said those are the 2 choices, just that it seems so to us. So it seems to us that that's what the world is, but he hasn't argued for it. Remember, oddly enough, he's going to start his philosophical essay by making a promise not to give us an argument for free will that is anything like what lots of the determinists and libertarians that we're going to be looking at want, which is a real solid argument, like a deductive thing, a proof of determinism or a proof of free will. He says, I don't want to do that, because then we wouldn't be living in a world where you're free. If you understood the argument, you'd be forced to accept it. And I think we live in a freer world than that. So I'm not even looking for an argument like that. He's going to stick with that the whole way through. Then he says, this is all paraphrased, but he says, we have to remember that there is no way of proving either determinism nor indeterminism. Right? He went to great lengths to say, look, the only difference between these 2 worldviews is that one says the things which seem possible are actually impossible because only what is necessary will ever be. And the other perspective says, actually, the things that seem like possibilities really are possibilities. And the only way that you could possibly resolve that question is if you had some sort of, from a scientific perspective, some sort of data about those possibilities that didn't happen. But if you're talking about possibilities that don't happen, you're talking about something that can never be considered by science, because science uses the data of experiment, of seeing what actually did happen, and that's all it can consider and refer to. So he says there's no way to have a scientific understanding of whether or not we're living in a world which is like what it seems to us, that there are possibilities that are real, or if we're living in a world which is the world that the determinists seem to have seen clearly or think they've seen clearly, which is a world where actually those possibilities are really impossible, and only whatever happens is what's been caused necessarily, and so there are no other possibilities. He says we could never actually know that. There's no argument from a scientific perspective that could resolve that for us. Now that we've cleared the way, so that's what he wanted to do. He wanted to say we're on equal playing field. We just believe what we believe because we want to, and it says something about us, and that's fine. But we can't know for sure the answer to this question. So I've cleared the room to be able to say, let's look at the consequences, the logical consequences of each of these ideas, and see if they mean something about the universe that we don't want to accept, or that we, after exploring and understanding and unfolding the consequences of believing either one of these faith positions, that we would come to understand that the one is less desirable for us than we thought it was, or more desirable than we thought it was before we examined it. So now that we've cleared the way, all we can do is this: look at the consequences of theorizing the world as deterministic versus indeterministic. Okay, so he says, fine, let's talk about it. What about regret? From the determinist perspective, we find some things regrettable. Some of these regrets are nearly impossible to avoid. Truly terrible things we think that it would be better in the world if they had simply not happened. we could regard regret as a mistake, but we can't avoid having it in some situations. The problem for the determinist course of thought is this: actions we find regrettable are also necessary in our worldview. The universe as a whole demands that that thing happen the way it happened. So it's not just that we regret this one thing, it's that the entire cosmos is in some sense regrettable. To find it inescapably regrettable is to lead logically to a conclusion that all is to some degree regrettable. This is a pessimistic or life negating. Those are not his terms, but you see, there's a nihilism there. There's a pessimism, a despair that might force itself upon us. But then he says, actually, there's another option for the determinist. The determinist doesn't have to despair. He could conclude that the regret, as unavoidable as it is itself an error, that there's nothing actually to regret. Nothing is regrettable because everything is necessary. So you could have a life affirming, a cosmos affirming attitude, but then you have to also say that it's not regrettable that this horrible crime has happened, right? This terrible injustice. The problem with the optimistic approach is the unavoidable regret is then itself something which it would be better if it did not exist, right? So either the cosmos demands horrible, nasty crimes happen because they're necessary, and if those things are regretted by us, then we have to say there's something about the world that we just don't like, something sad and regrettable and depressing about being. Or we have to say, I can't help but regret it. My regret has existed. I have regretted things in the past, even if I rightly understand that those are a mistake, and I try to stop regretting things and have a romantic view of how everything is the best possible world and it's all perfect the way it is and it's all acceptable and on the whole I can embrace it and all of that stuff. Even if that's the case, my regret, which is something that has existed, itself was unavoidable. The universe demanded that I live in error, that there be painful feelings of mistake that are themselves mistaken. So again, it seems like we can't get out of the fact that there's something regrettable about the cosmos itself, about the universe as a whole, if everything that happens is determined by that universe. Okay. Because determinists affirm that all things are necessary. Okay, there is a way out of this for the determinist, obviously, and it may be occurring to you now, he says. The determinist needs only to find a way to affirm as good both the murder and the regret for the murder. Our only point here is to show that the determinist position pushes you directly into the quagmire of the problem of evil. Okay. He's starting to explore determinism and trying to find reasons not to accept it. However, he doesn't even do that conclusively. He even leaves it open and never returns to it. The fact that there are ways of being a determinist that might be able to settle this dilemma that he's set up, which is kind of interesting. We'll have to talk about that more in a second. Okay, moving on. Let's look at morality and indeterminism, he says. Our aspirations, regrets, excitements, motivations, all these things and more become nonsense in the previous view. What consequences are there for giving them up? And since either view is unprovable, what reason do we have to give them up if they serve us? Okay, so here's some of his pragmatism coming in. He's saying, look, if we have a deterministic perspective, we have to admit that our aspirations, our regrets, our excitements, our motivations, and a whole host of other things are all actually nonsense. They're errors. They're mistaken. We would be less in error if we didn't have them or if we found a way to give them up. However, the only reason we would have trouble trying to find a way to give them up is if someone could prove to us determinism, and nobody can. We might take, he thinks, the fact that those things are valuable and useful for navigating the world and that they make a picture of the world that is helpful to us as good enough reason to just disregard determinism. If determinism can't coexist with those things, well, it wasn't proven to begin with, and it doesn't seem that helpful, and it forces me to try to rectify difficult philosophical problems between pessimism and romanticism, and And, to hell with it. I mean, you never gave me a reason I had to believe it. And so why isn't that a good enough reason to reject it if I don't like the worldview that it gives me? Here's a quote. He says, "I cannot understand the willingness to act, no matter how we feel, without the belief that acts are really good and bad. I cannot understand the belief that an act is bad without regret at its happening. I cannot understand regret without the admission of real, genuine possibilities in the world. Only then is it other than a mockery to feel, after we have failed to do our best, that an irreparable opportunity is gone from the universe, the loss of which it must forever after mourn. If you insist that this is all superstition, that possibility is in the eye of science and reason impossibility, and that if I act badly, 'tis that the universe was foredoomed to suffer this defect, you fall right back into the dilemma, the labyrinth of pessimism and subjectivism, from out of whose toils we have just wound our way. Now, we are of course free to fall back if we please. For my own part, though, whatever difficulties may beset the philosophy of objective right and wrong and the indeterminism it seems to imply, determinism, with its alternative pessimism and romanticism, contains difficulties that are greater still. Remember, he's saying the job of the philosopher in the position that we're in on this specific question, right? If it was possible to solve this problem and know for sure what the answer is, then none of this pragmatism would be acceptable or would be applicable. But when we're in a situation like this, there's a different pragmatism that he would use in other situations maybe. But specifically in a situation where we can't know whether or not the world really is the way it seems to us, or if the world really is the way the determinists describe it, then what we have a new job to do. Our new job is to figure out why we're disinclined to think one rather than the other. Psychological, right? This is all psychological. What is it about my character that makes me want to think this versus wanting to think that? Be as honest with myself about that as I can, and be as honest with others about it as I can. So that's what he's doing. He's saying, look, both of these worldviews have problems. The problems of indeterminism that you think are so horrible that you'd rather run to determinism, fine, that's your character. As for me, I see the problems of determinism as greater still, he says. You will remember that I expressly repudiated a while ago the pretension to offer any arguments which could be coercive in a so-called scientific fashion in this matter. And I consequently find myself at the end of this long talk obliged to state my conclusions in an altogether personal way. The most anyone can do is to confess, this is where he says that, is to confess as candidly as he can the grounds for the faith that is in him, and leave his example to work on others as it may. So remember, he thinks either position is a position of faith, and his pragmatist approach is very clear here. There are three camps into which a thinker can fall in this question. Pessimistic determinism, which states that all of the bad and the regrettable is necessary, and so the world itself is regrettable. Optimistic romanticism, which is another deterministic choice, which says that only the regret is an error, and all that seems regrettable is actually necessary and to be affirmed as good. Or potential-based real possibility that makes sense of good and bad coming into the world and leaves a hopeful path for a better future, he thinks. The camp one falls into is based on how unacceptable the thinker finds the alternatives and nothing more, right? So this is important because he's making a positive, solid philosophical argument for that. He's not claiming it to be the case the way because he doesn't make solid arguments for everything else he's saying, but he's saying, I'm making a solid argument here. You don't have a scientific reason to believe in determinism. You believe in it for the same reasons that I believe in indeterminism, because the alternative to you is too revolting. The alternative, for whatever reason, seems like a worse world, and you wouldn't want to think of yourself as living in that world. And that's fine, right? I have no argument to force you to think the other way. All we can do is be as honest with ourselves about why we choose one or the other, and recognize that they're both faith positions. Neither one has the high ground on the other. All right, so there are personality revelations to be found here. So that's one of the things that makes this question interesting, is that from the William Jamesian perspective, is that as you try to resolve the issue and why you think the way you think, you're learning something about yourself. And because that's all, it becomes psychological. It becomes a question of who am I and what's my character? Do I say yes to the world? Do I say no to the world? Do I say it's all great the way it is? And if I had the big godlike perspective, I would see that it's the best of all possible worlds, including the murder and the rape and the horrible injustice and the crime and all of that stuff. Or am I inclined to say, I hate the idea of moral responsibility so much because, or I want to think everything is scientific, and so I choose to think that way. Otherwise, it could be random and anything could happen. And that would be like he says in the story, he says his friend who says, this world you described sounds like a maggot-filled carcass with all these bubbling possible things that might bite you at any time. It's disgusting. It's revolting. I don't want to live in that world. And he says back, he says, yes, I can see why you wouldn't want to live in the world that I think we live in, but your world seems like a dead carcass with no maggots to eat the carrion. It's just the naked fact of what's unacceptable just there and to be affirmed as the thing it is. And I find that more unacceptable than the idea that things can happen and there's an uncontrolled element to being. Okay, no argument can prove one prejudice over the other. You pick the one you pick, and it reveals something about you, right? So you're learning something about yourself by trying to solve this problem, but you're also learning something about your interlocutor, right? It's relational knowledge, which is an amazing thing because the libertarians and the determinists, the hardcore ones, they think of this as almost like a scientific debate, a deductive debate. It would be like, let me study the biology of a certain type of plant or bird somewhere or an ecosystem. It's like, I'm just getting information about a world out there. Whereas from the William Jamesian perspective, it's like, no, stop fooling yourself. You don't have that kind of knowledge on a question like this. And yet the question matters and it's important to you and you can't get rid of it. So explore the question in a relational way. You actually are going to learn things about your character and your personality and the characters and personalities of people who are dislike you. And maybe there's good on both sides. And maybe there's important things to be said from each perspective. Who knows? He's not speculating about any of that. He just says, we're in this position where you pick the one that you're inclined to pick. And then we learn something about you because you've done that. And you learn something about yourself. And by debating it over and over again in a more sophisticated way, you learn more about yourself and more about the people you're talking with. And so it's the subject has become characterological, personal, and relational. It's like it goes from an intellectual curiosity to an exercise with the potential of having a love ingredient to it. I mean, it's wild. Okay. Do you find an ultimately irrational world which cannot be fully comprehended and predicted a monstrous proposition? Then you may pick the first two. One of the first two. If you find worse the idea that good is meaningless because all is good and all is bad and the terms don't mean anything anymore, then you might pick the latter. You might pick the indeterminism perspective. All right, that's enough talking about the notes on what he said. I think you'll probably agree it's a pretty wild essay. It's not exactly what maybe we would have predicted when we heard, okay, we're going to read another guy talking about determinism and free will. He has a very unique and interesting perspective. So I'm going to shut up now and let's discuss it. What did y'all think when you were reading it?
Well, I have a lot of thoughts on it, and probably an endless supply. It seems like one of those things that, being that it's open ended, like it's something that I could come back to years and years till the end of my life. So it's like, in the meantime, I kind of have preliminary thoughts, I guess, that might be, unstudied or maybe unlearned or something, but.
Let's do it, man. Let's do it.
Yeah, and what I think from where I'm at right now, definitely like as you were wrapping up, I think that's sort of the emphasis that I was seeing from it, is that basically I see him as rationalizing his worldview, and he's saying that everybody else rationalize. He admits that because everybody rationalizes their world. I mean, these aren't his words, but basically my summation. And it seems to me that, and surely there's more writings on. Surely he gets to this at some point, that he, in my opinion, seems to have these humanistic undertones that color his worldview.
Agreed.
And I see that in different places, and it's interesting to know. And I don't know to what degree he's aware of that. And I think it would be, for this to truly be complete. I'm sure this, like I said, he surely has these writings somewhere, but I think for it to truly be complete, he should fully analyze his own psychology, and as well as opponents of his inclinations. Like, for instance, I think, if he has humanistic inclinations that pull him in this direction, he should, if I were him and I wanted to sort of boost my position up, make it look better, I would take a character from the other side and analyze why they aren't as humanistic as me. Like, I think he's probably humanistic because he suffered a lot in his life. That's my guess, is that he's seen a lot of suffering. He has these inclinations that maybe Henry Thomas Buckle wouldn't have had. Maybe Henry Thomas Buckle just didn't suffer enough. And I think
if only we look, people want to take their time machine to kill Hitler, but they should definitely route themselves to Henry Buckle and torture him a little bit. Yeah. The guy needs to lose more chess games or something.
Yeah, no, I think that would, like, if he really dove into it this way, that would really convince me, because I think he's basically getting to that point, and it kind of left off there.
Yeah, that was the weakest part of his essay, when he just left off. I mean, he was started to explore the consequences of determinism. He sort of set up that it pushes you into this problem, but then he hinted that it could go a lot further, that discussion, and then it just, maybe it's the excerpt, but that was definitely the weakest part. Like, keep going, man. Keep exploring and see what you find.
Yeah, that was my one of my first thoughts until you had mentioned it. One of my first thoughts was when I felt like he was he overplayed the concept of regret, because I was sort of, like, in my mind, taking devil's advocate with a deterministic worldview.
Good. How so? Tell us, what did you think?
So I was thinking, like, the way that he set the scene of regret, I don't think really, and as you mentioned, I don't think it really, like, conclusively defeated a deterministic worldview, because there's no reason regret can't be a part of a deterministic world. It just seems like it maybe only seems like it wouldn't be, but that's just because it seems that way. And I think
he consciously was aware of the fact that he didn't demolish determinism.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
no, I mean, it's weird. It's annoying. I think that is the weakest part of his, not that he should have demolished it, but he really left off when things were about to get interesting there. But yeah, I think you're right. He didn't demolish determinism there. And it was definite. I think he was aware that he wasn't demolishing it, but it is a weakness for sure. Go ahead.
No, and additionally, he didn't demolish pessimism either. Like he said, we were climbing out of the labyrinth of pessimism, and I'm like, wait a minute, like, what did we do to it here? Because I'm certainly not fully up to date on everything pessimism, but I do often find myself, from what I know of it, kind of like orbiting that camp. Like, my thoughts sort of
Sure.
I often find myself in what I conceive to be the pessimist camp, and I can see why it would seem on first sight to many like that's a camp we want to get out of. We got to get out of the labyrinth of pessimism. But I think that it would only strike that way to people who it would strike that way. And like you said, I think he knows that. Like, he's basically just appealing to people who are within his reach, basically, which he admits to.
I think that's correct. Yeah, because it's characterological, right? So he's acknowledging what it is about himself, because he says, because you can't force me to accept determinism or indeterminism, because there's no way to settle it scientifically because of the argument he gave earlier. He said, all I have to know is something akin to why I don't desire to believe the world is like that, why that's not going to be a helpful way for me to live, and then I can turn away from it. And hey, I'm free from pessimism now, or at least the pessimism that was rearing its ugly head by the consequences of determinism, as he followed out logically what it would lead to. That's definitely not. That's not satisfying in a number of ways. I think I agree with you. I think that he could have explored that a lot further. And I mean, famously, Nietzsche has a very fatalistic perspective that allows him to. This is why Nietzsche talked about going beyond good and evil, because he recognizes what William James, as a child of his, in a sense, got right, which is that you can live underneath, lower on the mountain where good and evil matter. And of course, Zarathustra and Nietzsche, they're making all sorts of judgments about things all the time. But you have to get to an elevation to see the whole of the world before you can embrace it. And that what William James says is just a romantic thing to do, to say, well, it's all good in this sense, even though the particulars could be very bad. He doesn't explore any of that. He just basically says, because the problem of evil arises with the question of determinism, I think he thinks just from reading in the tone that the romanticism, so his only understanding of how to embrace it would be a romantic idea that, oh, it's all good as it is, which is very different than what Nietzsche was doing. Nietzsche's admitting you have to get beyond good and evil before you can say yes to the world in the way that you would have to if you have a fatalistic view of everything tied to everything else. But William James is saying, well, forget that. We're not getting beyond good and evil. From our daily life perspective, you only have two options in determinism. You can either despair and find everything pessimistic and not worth having because it requires, it demands, it makes necessary this horrible, regrettable crime because that was determined by the whole of it. Or you can, in that below good and evil perspective, say, no, this is the best of all possible worlds. It's so silly to regret. Everything is desirable. It's all necessary. And I think he thinks that second view is pretty idiotic. And I think he does a pretty good job of showing how the first pessimism thing is kind of inescapable unless you use the idiotic romanticism to try to get away from it. I mean, like you said, he never explored that further to see if there was a good way of solving that problem within that framework. And, maybe he should have done that. But he basically just says, look, you're either going to be an idiotic romantic or a nihilistic pessimist who despairs of being. And I don't think either of those is a good way to navigate the world. And since you can't force me to believe in determinism because there's no argument for it, I just reject it. And I'm going to go with this other perspective that is a world I think I can live in. Anyway, all of that to say, I agree with you. He sort of, it was pretty weak when he just sort of left it open and said, well, we should explore that more someday. It's like, well, why not do it right now? I don't know. Is that what you were saying, or did I miss the point?
No, that was pretty much exactly it. Is that like I just wonder to myself, why does he emphasize, for instance, he talks about like suffering, like the bad things that happen. He almost, he's sort of taking a humanist stance, saying that, like, how could they be justified? Like they're so bad. Like, what can justify this? Basically, that's what I'm taking from it, and it's sort of the humanist point that recurrent, like it comes back and back and back again to basically attack religion, at least, is like, how could a God let this happen? And it just seems like he sort of takes that same approach, and it's interesting. I don't know.
It's funny. I was listening to Akira the Don earlier, and he has a song with Norm Macdonald having a very serious debate about religion, and he points out something which is usually not observed by people. It's a real hell of an insight that Norm had, which is that the atheistic deterministic types are the ones, he says, living in a fantasy world where God can't do evil things. Like, why do it's like he's what William James is pointing out here is that it's your deterministic commitment to a scientism view of the world that's really sort of rooted in a father God who has everything figured out. Like, from his perspective, he knows all of the variables, and so it's all okay. And he says the problem of evil, the problem that usually people who are religious would have thrown in their faces, it just jumps out of the water at you if you're a determinist. There's a deep psychological insight here that the determinists and the scientismists and the anti-religious types are deeply Christian in a way that Nietzsche pointed out, and that most people miss out on because they notice how much they rail against religion all the time. It's, who rails against all the religions in the world all the time? The most religious people. So that's just an ironic character observation. I'm not trying to make a point about that, except just to notice that it's funny. William James is saying, oh, well, how do you deal with the problem of evil, you scientismists? It's like, wait a minute, aren't they the ones that don't have to deal with it? It's like, no, look, they're the ones saying everything that happens was written in the stars. It has to be. How do you swallow that? How do you accept that as a human being? And you keep using this word humanist perspective, and I think you're on to a really deep insight about William James, which we should talk about in a second. But first, let's wrap up his criticism of the determinist. Is like, look, your attitude is to say, at the end of the day, it's all sort of taken care of. Like, there's some law of physics. There's something overarching that has it all figured out, and so it has to be the way it is. It's very much a God of Christianity, a post-Cartesian Christianity, where he's outside the universe and he's made it all perfectly. And to notice that is, I think that's a deep psychological insight. I think a few geniuses like Norm, Nietzsche, and William James would notice how Christian the atheistic scientismist types are, the new atheist types are. Now, of course, there's an unfair, a lot of people will accuse them of being religious for other reasons, and maybe that's fair and maybe it's not. But in this particular sense, I don't know if I'm being clear enough, but I think it's, William James is saying this problem of evil is jumping out at you. I'm not imposing it on you. If I accept your perspective, it becomes the thing I have to wrestle with. You want to argue that you're not a determinist because of a faith position? You're definitely there because of faith. Your microscope didn't tell you the world is deterministic. You just want to believe it for some reason. So let's explore. Let's figure out what it is that's good or bad about your character that makes you go there. Let's circle back to what you keep saying about humanism. There's this old ancient Greek statement. I think it was something like, man is the measure of all things. That might be a good summation of pragmatism, right? William James is saying your valuations, your reasoning faculty and how you employ it, your thinking, everything about you is an expression of your character as much as it is a description of a world external to yourself. You can't escape that. So don't just accept it and let's do philosophy. Let's reason and use arguments and explore consequences and see how close we can come to the truth. But he's definitely doing it from a swallowing that core idea first as his starting point. Whereas the hardcore libertarians, the hard determinists, they think that they can sort of get a kind of a factual answer about the world outside themselves without bringing themselves into it. And I don't know how we should go around the room and ask. I don't know. I think Twilight's right that William James keeps bringing in this sort of human perspective to make his judgments. And I find it kind of exhilarating. I think it's kind of exciting to do that. And there's something intellectually impressive, but also sort of ethically courageous or invigorating, or that's not exactly the right word, intriguing and exciting about it. But I can also imagine somebody hearing what he's doing and thinking, that's dumb, that's terrible. Why not pretend we're living in a world where we can figure these things out as if they're external to ourselves? Taking the premise that Twilight and I are correct, that there's this humanist approach, which is the term you're using, to this. How did you all feel about that aspect of the way he wrote and the way he thought? Sort of the, who are you to tell me I can't be a human, approaching these questions as a human, sort of explicit commitment he makes throughout every aspect of what he's doing. Did anybody find that annoying, problematic, exciting? Were there any judgments, Pacific, Savad, Path, anybody has on that? I feel like I'm doing a bad job describing it. Have I made myself clear what I think Twilight's getting at when he says human, this humanistic approach of William James's?
Well, to clarify, I'm not sure, because I don't even know that I really clarified where I was coming from on that. But I guess one of the main things that made me think along these lines was, just how it seemed like he was emphasizing. Because there's so much here that I'm trying to like sift through
it's
exactly what it was, but it seems like he's he, on one hand, at least, how he fends off the determinists is basically saying, like, how can something better be just like how can that Brockton murder like be a part of this plan, basically, and like, so it may even be less so that he's a determinist than it is he's clarifying the implications in a way that would appeal to anyone's sensibilities. Anyone.
You mean a humanist?
Yeah.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
Maybe he's not exceptionally bleeding heart, but he's just clarifying it in a way that anybody who's has a modicum of that sensibility, that they would see the implications of what determinism means. And so
he's appealing. I think that's exactly what you're saying, and I think he's appealing to the human normative judgments as if they're as legitimate as anything else. Remember, in the first section, he says, "Look, if I find that the implications of an idea that I don't know for sure are true outrage my moral demands, I'm going to feel justified in rejecting it, or at least questioning it. I don't have to accept it if there's not a solid deductive reason for why I should, or a scientific argument type thing why I should accept it." And he says, I feel I have a right to reject something if it outrages my moral demands. There's something impressive about the way philosophers talk when they do the opposite of that, where they say, look, it doesn't matter if I like it or not. Let's find out what's true. William James isn't saying I go through life deciding that whatever I want to feel is true is all that matters to me. He's saying, after I use philosophy and reason to know for sure that I can't know for sure the answer to this, now it's on a different tier where I'm allowed to judge it by these other criterion. And as you point out, they're very much human, and they're explicitly characterological. It's not just human, but it's my personality doesn't like this, your personality doesn't like that, and so we side where we side. But there's an ethos to it. There's an appeal to a kind of he's even saying the word disgust. Like, why would you want to live in a world that's deterministic? Why would you want to live in a world that's indeterministic? Whichever one you reject, it's partly often because you're disgusted by that perspective, and you'd hate to think that you're living in a world like that. And since you don't know if you are or not, you're justified. Now, he could be wrong about that, but that's what he's saying. He's saying you're justified in, as long as you meet the demands of being as honest with yourself and with others about why it is that you, as a character in the world, rather than outside the world, you're a part of this universe you're trying to understand. And this part of the universe doesn't like thinking of the universe in that way. So express that. Don't fool yourself into thinking, therefore, it's absolutely could not possibly be the case, because you don't have an argument that solid for either side. But do some psychological analysis of yourself, because there's some truths about this question that will reveal things about your character. And that's the best you can do. So go and do that. Does that sound right? I think it is. I think I'm more impressed with what he's doing as just a wild intellectual accomplishment than maybe anybody else is here, which is maybe why I'm focusing on it so much. But
no, I would agree with that, because I mean, making a good point on, stating like that determinism is, like I said, they're the most religious of just, right, from their viewpoint is like nothing else is impossible. You can't even consider anything. And I hadn't looked at it and thinking about it in that frame before, but I certainly think it's on point, because
I agree.
Right, there's nowhere else to go, and to I guess even open your mind the consideration that there is no other possibility is.
It's a faith position.
What's that?
It's a faith position.
Yeah.
I don't agree with everything he says. I think I agree with you that he hit the nail on the head with that. I think he's completely correct that either advocates of either view, the way he's framed it and understood it, advocates of either view are clearly betraying their own desire to believe more than they are proving libertarianism or proving determinism. You're not proving either one. You have a faith position. You're just not acknowledging it as such. I think that's correct. That's a heck of an accomplishment, I feel. I think that he hit the nail on the head with that. I think I agree with you completely that there's things to disagree with or be disappointed about or want to flesh out further in parts of his essay, perhaps. But on that one, I think he really did hit the nail on the head there. It's a faith position that the world can be understood perfectly according to your science if only you had all of the factors. You don't, and it's unlikely that that's the case. In fact, as William James points out, you could never know for sure if that was the case. You just want to believe it is. Well, believe it because you want to, but start acknowledging that you want to and see what that reveals about what the universe has manifested in you and your character, because you're a part of this. And I'll do the same, and we'll see what effect those things have on the world. It's not my position how he ends this, but on that earlier point, I think he hit the nail on the head. I think he understands the framework of the problem correctly in a way that none of the other guys we've read have. I mean, they look almost cartoonish. Paul Ray is extremely impressive. His arguments are really powerful. He's a good writer and he's a good thinker. He looks like a child compared to William James, as far as I can tell. I mean, it's not fair. William James came much later, and he had the benefit of people starting to understand Nietzsche, whereas Paul Ray just had Nietzsche as a sexual rival, contemporary of his. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's really interesting from a philosophy perspective of kind of having just a silo on that viewpoint is as you mature through life and you learn more about things, you discover, right, there's more questions, there's better questions, but you realize that you probably know a lot less.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's interesting that it comes from that framework of, you know, maybe I can learn some new shit. And wouldn't that be exciting?
It is to him. It is to you, perhaps. It is to a certain character. To another character, it's revolting. It's terrifying. Anything can happen. It's who know. It's like it's too chaotic. There's a chaotic potential, random element to being. I can't live like that. I have to believe that even though I don't know, if I did know, I'd know all. It's like, well, okay. Tell yourself that fairy tale. Believe it. I can't prove it's wrong, right? I mean, it's not like he's saying you're a faith position, therefore I'm superior. He's saying we're both in a faith position here. We're on exactly equal playing field. You can pretend that you have science on your side, but you don't. But I don't have a knockdown argument on my side either. We're just deciding from our characters which we find more acceptable. And there are sophisticated determinists. Scott Adams, for one, right? They don't all look juvenile like Paul Ray does when we examine them. And there's some really, really great determinists out there. But I keep trying to avoid saying what I think about this topic. I can't avoid hinting at it a little bit by saying, I think what we really need are more sophisticated people on both sides to keep having an ongoing conversation, which is not, it's a hint at what I think. But in any case, I agree with you, Savad, just personally from my own character. I don't think that we have an argument that others have to accept, but I think that it's impressive and inspiring, the attitude and approach that he's able to have. It's courageous, and it's disgusting and horrifying to some of his intellectual peers and friends who flat out told him, what? You think we live in a world where who knows what might happen based on choices? They're horrified at the idea. And, one can sympathize and understand why someone would be, but I find it impressive. I find his approach impressive in that characterological courage way, as well as I think intellectually what he proved about the fact that we're on equal playing field is also impressive intellectually. So yeah, all of that to just say I agree. I think I have the same impulse that you do towards his admiration for what he's doing there. Twilight.
Yeah. So, as I said earlier, I have a ton of thoughts, and so if I were to give a, sort of preliminary, final thinking on it, I think I similarly, I do think that he, so basically, I think that he's perhaps, closest to the truth than, either camp or other camps. And that I think and again, this comes from my, I don't know, my intuition or whatever, my own personal worldview, that I think that the truth, the objective truth, is probably so profound. If we ever know it in an afterlife, or if we could know it, I think that it's surely so profound that our the default popular worldviews, like determinism, free will, it's all this or it's all that way. I think that they do what probably is true so so little justice by thinking that it's just all one way. And it's just my intuition, I guess, that whatever the truth is, it's surely very profound, and it's probably paradoxical. So it's
Yeah.
it would probably, it would blow our minds, and it would probably it would make sense of a lot of things. So it's almost maybe it's compatibilist sensibilities. I don't know, but I think I take a similar intuitive approach to what he's getting at, in that these different worldviews are, like you said, having two maps are describing the same thing, and it may even be more than two maps. I don't know. I just think that there's like there's different things that can both be true, and somehow the final truth will reveal how, but we can't even realize it. And so maybe he would constitute as a consummate thinker, as you were saying. So I don't know. I think he's
I think you guys are too impressive. This is a way cooler conversation than I thought we'd have in a 101 course. Hell yeah, man. So Socrates said, I've been spending my whole life trying to get to the truth. That's why we've been doing philosophy. It's why we've been arguing and sharpening our views and sophisticating our propositional arguments and understandings and all of this stuff. And then on the day he was going to drink the hemlock, he said, I don't know anything. I have nothing like the knowledge I've been searching for. I won't have that until about 30 minutes from now after I'm dead. Right? You can't have it in this life. You have to aim towards it and orient yourself towards it as best you can in this life so that you have the best chance of finding it once you're dead. And he said, reunified with the great whole, the RK, the sum of all truth and justice and all that. I'm not arguing that that's the case. I'm just saying that's the perspective you're describing. It's Socrates' perspective. It's a pretty good guy to be paraphrasing unintentionally or intentionally. You mentioned two languages and then maybe more. Spinoza said we as humans have two languages available to us, the subjective and the objective. Either one can describe all of the phenomena of the universe and how they relate to each other. They're completely incompatible, or at least they seem completely incompatible. There's no way to translate between the two, and yet you could rely wholly on either one. And then he said something interesting that I always scratched my head about why he even came up with it, because it seems like such a silly thing to speculate on, but he's a great thinker. And you just said the exact same thing, which is maybe there are other languages too. And Spinoza posited that there are 1,000 languages to describe being, and God has access to all of them, and we only have access to two. I don't know what you and he are thinking about. You're way beyond anything I've speculated on before, but you're quoting Socrates and Spinoza without meaning to, or maybe with meaning to. So both of those are fantastic things to think.
I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you are. So one of the things that's funny about the word philosophy and saying you're going to do a philosophy class is there's all this pretension that people imagine about it. And often people are very hesitant to engage in a conversation on it because they think, ooh, philosophy, this thing. But you're quoting Spinoza and Socrates without knowing it. You're engaged in the conversation. This is it. Honestly, trying to figure these things out makes the ideas emerge to any intelligent thinking person. And so the greatest mind said, I also don't know anything. Let's keep trying to get closer. And so, yeah, I'm just impressed by how rich this conversation is right now. There was something else you said. I'm trying to remember what it was because I wanted to cover the Spinoza and, okay. Yeah. So you suspected that there might be a paradoxical solution, that once you're imagine being in that post-death Socratic place where you're reunified with the whole RK, the sun, the source of all being, and now you have that Buddha-like nirvana, total knowledge, one with everything, whatever. Is that going to be in the objectivist language or the subjectivist? Well, it's probably just so much more profound that you hinted at the idea that it might paradoxically be both at the same time. And that's actually closer to my position than William James or anything else we're probably going to read here, which is that I think both the determinists and the hardcore libertarians are correct. They're both completely correct. And it's weird to say that because I'm not being a compatibilist when I say that. So the compatibilists think, okay, the world can be deterministic, and at the same time, we have all the valuable ideas of freedom, and they're very interesting. We're going to spend some time talking about some compatibilists later. What I'm saying is worse than that. What I'm saying is there are scientific experiments that prove that a photon or an electron is a wave and not a particle. And there are other experiments that prove it is a particle and not a wave, right? Not that it's both, it's that it's both and not the other one. And then the physicists just have to swallow it and say, okay, it's a wave and not a particle, and it's a particle and not a wave. Fine. That's what the furthest investigations into the nature of being from a physicist's perspective are forcing the physicists to assent to, even though they can't possibly wrap their minds around it. That's what I think. That's what I think the nature of all being is. And I think that if you do have an answer to the question, that's the type that William James is saying we can't possibly have, and that Socrates said we can't possibly have this side of death, that if you did have that answer, it would be like that. It would be something that you can't wrap your head around on this side of being. And, maybe Socrates can do it because he lived a better life than anyone else's. And so maybe he reached that place or whatever. Maybe if we live the philosophical life or whatever it is to get to that place, perhaps we can comprehend it somehow. But I think there's something paradoxical going on, that you could either say, well, that just means the question's meaningless and let's think about something else. But the problem is the question forces itself upon us, and it's clearly not meaningless, and it clearly matters to us. And so what I would say, again, I was trying to avoid this, but what I would say is very much along the lines of what you said of the paradoxical, the both and kind of thing, which is to say, not to find a way in which they're compatible, to recognize they're incompatible, that they never cross. They're like two rails of a railroad track. They never cross each other. Lean on them both. That's how you get somewhere. It doesn't make sense, but I'm admitting it doesn't make sense before I say it, which might be a virtue. It might just be a way of covering for the fact that it doesn't make sense. But that is what I think, something along those lines, that they're both accurate and insufficient without the other, something like that. But we shouldn't have gotten to the end. We've got all these other guys to read, and perhaps they'll have answers, especially the compatibilists, who I think you're going to find interesting. And there's some psychologists and some other people who have interesting arguments on both sides that we're going to be looking at soon. So we'll explore that. But I think you're on to something there, is I guess all I'm saying. Was that good, or did I distract from the point you were trying to make? Did I miss the point?
No, I think that was spot on. I was trying to process it all, basically trying to digest it, because it just seems like he, like you said, like I totally agree. Like I even though I wouldn't quite consider myself a determinist, I did quite like Paul Ray as a writer. But like you said,
he's impressive.
But even he, I think, was dwarfed by sort of the profound implications, and like it really is like a starting point for thinking about this, and it's kind of maybe the beauty of it not having a conclusion to it, and sort of leaving things open-ended.
William James, you mean, leaving it open-ended?
Oh yeah, William James.
Yeah, well, I agree, and I think that, look, it was obvious to all of us. Multiple people brought this up in our class on Paul Ray. He never argues for determinism. He just assumes it's the only thing any thinking person could agree with. He provides absolutely no argument. When William James comes along and says that's an article of faith, he's pointing out the obvious, that for some reason, hundreds of years of people debating it, often they never notice that both sides have a position of faith. They believe what they want to believe because they want to believe it. And they could both be wrong. They could both be right in a way that we can't really justify, since they contradict each other. But that could be the case. Or, one could be right and the other wrong, but it can't be settled. And William James, I think of all the stuff he said, he hit the nail on the head with that one. He demonstrated that it was an article of faith. And it was. I mean, it's just transparent. And it's evidently motivated too. I mean, you can see that, like, the point of Paul Ray's argument is to talk about moral responsibility. It's something like getting rid of guilt and shame because it's too big a burden, but I can get rid of it if I conceptualize myself as a robot, or something like that. Or maybe it's more admirable than that. It's the idea that he's taking on the sins of the world, and he's saying all the regrettable things, it's too much for me to imagine they exist. I have to have a way of figuring out that they must be, and it's a part of the grand scheme that's inescapable. And so, whatever it is, it's clearly motivated. That's the simple point. It doesn't matter. I mean, it can be an admirable motivation, and he could be correct. I mean, we're not saying this disproves anything he's saying. I don't think he's wrong in a sense. But what we're saying is, the thing William James sees clearly, that the hardcore libertarians and the hardcore determinists don't see is that they're expressing their desire to believe, their will to believe, more than they're actually proving something others should have to accept from a logical, philosophical argument lens. That's not what's happening at all. Paul Ray is preaching. He's advertising his character. He's motivated to conceptualize the world in a certain way to solve moral issues and normative questions, and that's what's happening. He's a priest, right? He's a theologian. He's not presenting you the scientific results of what he saw under a microscope, so now you should accept it too because it's just science. That's not happening at all. It's never happened, and I think William James is accurate when he points that out. He says that could never happen. This is the type of question that can't be resolved like that. So cloak yourself in the priestly robes of scientism all you want. That's not why you believe what you believe on this. Science isn't telling you. Your telescope and your microscope didn't give you reasons to believe this. You're manifesting a character. You're bringing you're embodying a way of being in the world that's a part of being that says, I see it this way because I want to, or because I don't want to see it this other way. And again, it's important to remember that William James is not a relativist. He's not a subjectivist in a pejorative sense, right? He's not saying everything we think is completely unscientific or nothing we think could be logically figured out. He's saying this one can't. I proved it. I did it philosophically. I have the burden of proving with argument why this can't be settled in that way. Now that I've done that, I'm free to observe the truth about myself and about others and even use philosophy and ethics and logical consequences to decide which one I feel inclined to believe and figure out why, right? But he's not starting with, hey, go through life that way. If you want to believe you can fly, believe you can fly if it makes you feel better. He's not doing anything like that, okay? He's not an anti-realist. He's not a postmodernist. He's not deconstructing the meanings of words and saying none of it's meaningful in any way. He's not a relativist. You believe what makes you feel good about anything, and that's fine. He's not doing anything like that. He's saying, I'm taking seriously this question, and I'm saying, let's look for a solid answer. Oh, look, while I was looking for a solid answer, I came to the conclusion, and I think I'm right with a solid argument that you'll never get a solid answer this side of death, and maybe ever, that this isn't the type of thing that can be resolved that way, that anybody who argues passionately for either side is preaching more than they are arguing or providing reasons why you should agree. They're not doing that at all. And I think he's just right about that. I think he's just nakedly right about that part of what he wrote. Paul Ray is preaching and William James is preaching, but only William James admits and acknowledges that that's what he's doing. And again, he's preaching, but he's doing philosophy to set up the stage for why it's appropriate in this setting to do. So it's not like he's saying to hell with philosophy or you can't resolve other questions or things like that. It's a hell of a thing. I mean, it's a heck of a thing. What he does is impressive for sure, I think. At least to me it is.
Yeah, he did even there was a point where I think he basically clearly stated a sentiment that I maybe latently have felt, and he basically said something. He mentioned, like, by accepting determinism, like the implications being that it's like life unfolds like an insincere play, and like, or something along those lines. And I was like, that's so true. Like, it even, as the whole essay is about the moral implications, like that's just like tragedy isn't tragedy anymore, and it's just interesting to think about. Like, it's, I don't know. I mean, yeah, life is more dull when you, when there, I guess there's no chance, like everything's scripted basically. It's like it's like a play. And so
it's like a play where everyone's disingenuous, right? Like you said.
Yeah, exactly. So I do think that, his inclinations, like his worldview, does provide for a more full life. And I guess I could see how, if he was a student of Nietzsche, like, how this is fundamentally like a life affirming
Well,
worldview.
to you it does. To you it does. That's to be a William Jamesian, to take on that lens. To William James, it seems like a better world. To you, it seems like a better world, and that's as much as we can say, because Nietzsche disagrees. Nietzsche is a fatalist. The Hindus believe that the entire world is an act being performed by the great deity for himself as the audience. Okay, there are people who have very sophisticated perspectives from the other side of this, and they're invigorated and excited by the idea of, Nietzsche and Zarathustra. His character Zarathustra absolutely disagree with William James. They agree with the whole setup, and that's where he got it from studying Nietzsche in a very serious way. But Zarathustra, his character, swallows and absorbs and accepts and says yes to life as a fatalistic thing, where every tiny ingredient is tied to every other one in a completely unbreakable way, as a singular whole, which is what William James says is the thing that he doesn't want to think is true about the world. So even though we're saying Paul Ray, we should say other libertarians and determinists who think that they have sort of a deductive scientific, he said, in the scientism style kind of argument for knowing for sure that either one of these is correct, seem juvenile. There are very sophisticated ways of being a William Jamesian pragmatist or a Nietzschean fatalist or something. You can be on the other side and not be juvenile, is all I'm saying. But to be true to William James's perspective is, all we can say is, I Twilight, I Zara, I Savad, whoever wants to say this, I find the descriptive perspective, the model, the image of the cosmos that William James presents as exciting and courageous and worthwhile and better and more desirable and potentially good, right? Because he says goodness can come into the world in this way. There's more goodness to be had about the world conceptualized in that way. Whereas there are others who have very sophisticated perspectives where they acknowledge, oh, this is sort of a faith position. This is a characterological thing. This is a Hindu relating to the deities in a relational, characterological kind of way. Shiva is dancing, and that's not deductive propositional argument. That's relational, characterological knowledge, and they're excited by that world, and they think that's a beautiful, good thing. William James is disgusted by it. You might find William James exciting and inspiring because you too think that that's there's no way to embrace that, but real choices with real possibilities, now that's exciting. Something's at stake. Put your chips. You may as well put them down because they're going to get taken away from you anyway. And fuck it, the roulette wheel is not deterministic. Something could happen, and it could be good or it could be bad. But we're really putting it on the line, and the drama means something. There's, like you said, there's real tragedy, and there's also the potential for real heroism and stuff like that. I guess all I'm saying is the point is either perspective embraces what they embrace for their own personal characterological, psychological reasons. And that's what William James says is the best we can do, is to find out what's true about ourselves, why we want to think of the world this way, and be as honest about it with ourselves and then with other people, and see what effect that has as it either inspires or fails to inspire other people. And that the nature of the debate becomes like that, since it's not the sort of thing that can be resolved in the scientific kind of fashion. I think I should check the comments here, because I think maybe Path is on the YouTube one. So if he posts any comments, I'll post them here for us to read and consider. The only disappointing thing about the essay is that he sets that all up, and then we have to move on to the next author and we're only looking at this thin excerpt and we don't get to explore the determinism and the ways of dealing with the problems, he says, the dilemmas that pop up and the types of characters that would want to embrace indeterminism. Like, he just sort of sets it up that that's what we have to do. And then he nakedly just tells us, this is why I like possibility as real. And so I'm going to live life that way because it's this faith or that faith. You know what I mean? There's no philosophical argument telling me to go this way and I'm rejecting it because I want to believe what I want to believe. It's no, we all want to believe what we want to believe, and there's nothing more to help resolve this question. So I'll just be honest that this sounds exciting to me. It sounds like a good world, and the other one doesn't. But you may feel the opposite. You know, it's not like he says, so therefore anyone who thinks the opposite must be depressed and have a horrible worldview and terribly unsophisticated. It's like, no, maybe you've got it worked out and maybe you've got something to say. But the cool thing about William James is you have to come to him and say it in this way that he's set up the question, because I think he's right in his setup and his framing of the whole thing. You have to say, this is why you should feel excited to live in a deterministic world. Because you've been pretending that you have arguments for why you should have to accept it, but you have no such thing. So why not just be honest and say, here's what's exciting about it. It lets us know that all of the tragic, horrible, terrible things that people are doing, they couldn't help it anyway. So let's just make the world a better place so that that's less likely to happen in the future. And that gives us an exciting chance to do something morally very serious. I mean, you could imagine someone being psychologically inclined in the opposite direction towards determinism, just like you acknowledge that you're psychologically motivated and excited by the idea that, no, what I do really matters. And I'm not picking sides in this conversation, right? I think, you know, yours might be more exciting to me too. I'm trying not to say which one I like better, just to notice that what William James hasn't done is set it up as equal faiths and then therefore prove the determinism one is worthless. No, it's equal. It's no longer higher. It's no longer getting to claim scientific superiority. It's equal, but that's not him demolishing it, right? That's him saying, okay, here we are. We're on equal playing ground. Here's why I think this. Tell us why you think this. Let's see if that has the power to inspire, because that's the best we can do. But that's also a heck of a thing to do, right? It's not like a lesser thing to do. It's pretty exciting. Am I being coherent? Is there anything anybody wants to jump up and say here? Like, dead on balls accurate is what I would say to sum up what I'm saying about what you were saying there, Twilight. I just take a lot more words to say it sometimes, but
yeah, it's certainly a lot to digest. I think that there could be 10, 20, 50 classes on just this idea. And I don't know if, I guess, being that pragmatism is its own school or camp, I'd be interested to know if William James had like any pupils that came after him. That I feel like he's a figure that started the conversation. He was really good at starting the conversation. I think that he's
good question.
He
wrote a lot,
right? So yeah, I
go to the website. There's like a bunch of different suggestions of things he wrote, and there's added readings that you can put on your nightstand for a monthly reading thing to do. Go check out the William James section and see what you find there. He wrote a lot. He started a major school of philosophy. He wrestled with Nietzsche in a very successful way and developed an entire school of thinking. And that means there's a lot of people that think in his way of thinking. And there's whole libraries of shelves of books written by people who are arguing with it, arguing for it. There's a lot. There's a whole undiscovered country that he pointed out to us, and your suspicion that there's a lot more there is correct. So if you're excited by it, go check out the website for, I think the one I would start with is, I'm on the website here. The one I would start with is, I think The Meaning of Truth, The Meaning of Truth by William James. You can get a link for where to purchase it on the website. So yes, he's what we're reading here. This tiny excerpt is starting a huge conversation and flushing out the consequences of pragmatism and figuring out how it applies to different areas. All of that sounds super valuable, and it's what I want to do more of. So I'm reading one of William James's works off this website right now myself.
I think along with that, along with him writing more and people under him also writing, I think what would be even more interesting, what I would be interested in is people on either camp that take issue with him, that argue. Like I think you were talking about earlier. Like me
Yep.
personally, I think the best thing that can happen for any idea or any observer of anybody trying to get to the truth is to see it fleshed out in argument. And I think like that's just
Absolutely,
for any issue basically. So I'd be interested how I'd be interested how Paul Ray would respond, or anybody, or Sam Harris, or Scott Adams, anybody. I'd be interested to see their take.
yeah, this is a live discussion for sure. So as you get into reading any of these books in any of these sections, we've got Sam Harris, we've got Scott Adams, we've got other books in other sections. But as you even read the William James books, he's responding to people, he's arguing with them. You'll have him point out the other people who have other perspectives, and you can take that as a jumping off point, because the conversation is only alive where the conversation is alive, as you point out, and that's only when there's more than one person taking up opposite positions. So you're not going to find any of the books that are recommended on this website that make you feel like, oh, this is the only way to think. Now I'm in this church and I'm reading this Bible. It's like, no, the whole thing is alive, because it's very much now one of the alternative perspectives that's very popular nowadays, that has a lot of trouble with pragmatism and doesn't like William James terribly much, although it's very interestingly related, would be I think Aquinian approach, that would say, look, the only language for truth is the scientific language. So whatever science needs to believe in order to do is the truth. Or William James is saying almost the opposite, right? He's definitely not putting science on the throne when he's doing this, right? He's basically saying it's so unimpressive. It's actually a faith when you look at what it can contribute to these types of questions. But the Quinian attitude is saying, look, the only right way of thinking is this scientific way of thinking. Science is almost, I know some people who are very taken with Quine, and basically the way they put it is science is really just right thinking applied, right? It's just, by definition, that's correct thinking. And so they reverse engineer it, and they say, well, science gave us, the iPad and the trip to the moon, and it's successful and effective and whatever. We're going to say science is defined as the best ideas we have so far, and whatever consensus there is about the best ideas we have so far, that's the definition of truth, right? William James is defining truth as what works to get you through. It's very much the subjective language versus the objective language. You can see them both defining truth from the exact opposite perspective there, right? The science is objectifying the world, and whatever it has to believe about the world in order to work is by definition true. By definition true. And what William James is saying is, I'm a character moving from point A to point B. Whatever I believe that helps me navigate there, my map of the world, if it gets me there, that's the truth. The better it gets me there, the more true it is, right? That's pragmatism. So it's interesting because they're both very post-Nietzschean. They're both very sophisticated. That's sort of, how should I say it? That might be a non-juvenile contemporary Paul Ray. If Paul Ray was resurrected, he might be transformed into Aquinian, potentially. I mean, they're not the same thing because it seems juvenile to us what he's doing now. But what Quine's doing is not juvenile, and yet it's still on that side, I think. So I don't know. If you're looking, that's the best I can do. I'm not an expert on this. Like I said, I'm trying to read more William James. He's been on my list forever, and I should have been reading him for the last 6 years. I've been doing other things, and I shouldn't have been. So I can't give an authoritative answer on anything like this, but if you're looking for the conversation, start with some of the stuff that's suggested there. Maybe The Meaning of Truth by William James would be a good one. And then you'll find the people he's responding to and arguing with there. And I don't know, I think Quine might be a good alternative camp that's the contemporary. It's just as sophisticated. It's had to answer the same types of questions. And so it's up to date in a sense, if that makes any sense. That's the best I can do. I'm glad you're curious about it. I share your curiosity on William James. I want to read more and understand this pragmatism thing more. Probably the best place to get it is Sam Harris debating Jordan Peterson. That's Paul Ray and William James having a debate. And, it's funny, when they first had their first debate, they got so bogged down on the definition of truth that they came back to have another debate later. You can find that. That was the first conversation between Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson. And they came back to have another conversation later, and they were like, oh, yeah, we really went off the rails there. People didn't really like that. I'm like, what are you talking about? I was glued. I was like, this is the shit. This is the conversation right here. I wish you would just do that one again instead of saying, well, we'll have to put our definition of truth aside so we can get somewhere. It's like, no, it was exciting. You should look that up. The first debate between Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson, I think it was just on video chat. I don't even think it was like at a theater like their later ones were. The later ones are good too, but that's basically Paul Ray talking to William James. And what's great about it is everybody who feels inclined to be a scientismist and a determinist probably thought, oh, Sam Harris wiped the floor with him. The stuff he said, that's the truth, baby. And everybody who thinks, oh, that scientism stuff, that's a religion that doesn't even know it's a religion, we're thinking, yeah, Jordan Peterson kicked ass. I can imagine that, especially on that first one, that anybody who is interested just sort of thinks that their guy won, which is a sign that that's a live conversation. That's as I'm rambling here, that's the closest I can come up with what you're looking for. I share your curiosity to go down that road further. So if you haven't seen that debate, definitely look that up. That's a good evening. That's a good time listening to the debate, but the first one between Sam Harris and Jordan. The other ones were great too, but that first one was awesome. And Jordan Peterson is clearly arguing for a pragmatism. He's trying to bring psychology, bring personality, bring that humanism thing you were talking about. He's saying like this, you can't ignore this. You're making value judgments. You can't get an ought from an is. If you just reduce your language to the material descriptions of what is, you can't account for what ought to be. But you are a valuing creature. All of your arguments, all of what you pay attention to, what you don't, what you find acceptable and what you don't, is all based in normative judgments. So you can't escape that there's an ingredient in this conversation that science can't describe and can't be reduced to something that it can adjudicate. And there's a type of person who finds that very suggestion revolting. How dare you? How dare you say that we won't have that type of scientific knowledge? I don't have it now, but in 650 years, we'll know everything and how it all works. That's their faith. They believe that for faith reasons. That doesn't make them wrong, by the way, because the only alternative is also believed for faith reasons. It's just the second side at least acknowledges it more often than the first. I forgot about that debate. That's a good one. If you're really interested in what William James and Paul Ray would say to each other, check out Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris, their first conversation. It went on for hours and they never got past. They started talking about important things and they just got stuck on the definition of truth the entire time. And it was awesome. Everybody complained about it. They even apologized basically. And I don't know why. It was the best. It was a great conversation. So how about this? I've gone ahead and I've added some quizzes and done the notes for future readings that we're going to get to. I'm almost done with this first section. We've got the next ones finished. As far as William James goes, all I did was, there's basically no quiz. All I did was say, rate on a scale of 1 to 10 from William James is an idiot and everything he says is wrong to William James is a genius and everything he says is correct. 1 to 10, and then a short essay or a long essay if you want on why do you rate him that way. So if anybody wants to, they're welcome to work out what they think about William James by trying to put together a coherent essay, which is a great way of thinking things through. And if you submit it there and let me know, I'll go take a look at it if you want. But if you want to just use that, you can. Otherwise, that's all I did as far as quizzes go. The next time, we'll talk more about all these things in the after show in a minute, but the next person we're going to get on to reading is H.D. Lewis. Let me see here. Okay, so H.D. Lewis and John Stuart Mill, then Moritz Schlick, Campbell Hospers, and Ben and Peters. I'm excited about the rest of the people we're going to read. This conversation is just going to get more and more interesting from both sides. We're going to get really cool, interesting, unique perspectives and from both sides. And so the rest of what we read is going to be great. And so we're going to have a schedule change. We're going to meet on Tuesday, and I'll do the reading tonight and upload it with the commentary, and we'll do H.D. Lewis on Tuesday. Then we have John Stuart Mill, and I think what we'll try to do is Thursday and Friday we'll do John Stuart Mill. So we're just adding a third day to the week. And I think that schedule is going to get us on a really fast pace for getting through this. We're not trying to rush it, but we're also not trying to take 2 months to do the first eighth of the thing. We want to get on to other subjects eventually. We're not in a hurry, but so we'll meet on Thursday at the same time and Friday at the same time. And we'll do John Stuart Mill on both of those days. And then Schlick and the guys who respond to him is basically Campbell, Hospers, Ben, and Peters. They're all having an ongoing conversation with one another and referencing each other in various ways. And it's good. It's going to be really good. We're going to get some other cool perspectives. We won't talk about them now, but we'll get to them. So I'll upload the reading for Tuesday and the commentary for Tuesday. I'll make sure the quizzes and the website are up to date. And we'll talk about Lewis on Tuesday, and then we'll do John Stuart Mill on Thursday and Friday. Let me end the broadcast. Let's double check and see if Path left us a note. No, he didn't. Okay, we'll end the broadcast. We'll go to the after show, and then that's where we'll continue from there. Thanks again.